Hi, I'm Brad from Make It, and today I'll be building this side table or nightstand using one sheet of birch plywood along with a walnut drawer front with walnut legs. Stick around to see how I made it. I began cutting the plywood into more manageable pieces using my circular saw. Also, I want to note that for more details on this project, I'll have a cut list, a build article, and tools that I use will be posted in the description below. My work area started getting snowed out, so I had to make the rest of my cuts inside. Living in Wisconsin, the snow never gets old, even in April. Anyways, back to the build. I made more of my cuts using a speed square and a circular saw, but then to make up some time, I used my table saw to make the rest of the cuts. The main concept of this table is to layer the plywood and have the end grain of the plywood as the main part of the table. Therefore, I began to make a template that I would reference the rest of my cuts for the table. Once I had everything drawn out, I used a stop block setup on my bench press to drill holes for the inside curve part of the template. This gave me perfect curves and made it much easier to cut out the inside part of the template. With the holes done, it was now just a matter of cutting everything out using the jigsaw. I made sure to cut along the outside of the line and not directly on the line. Then I used my random orbital sander to sand up to the line and get a straight edge on the inside of my template. Now that my template was complete, I used this to make reference lines on the rest of the boards, and then I followed the same process as before. Drill the holes and then cut everything with the jigsaw. When I cut the rest of the boards, I made sure to cut along the outside of the lines again because now I attached the template to the freshly cut pieces using 4 screws that were countersunk. I can then take it over to my router with a flush trim bit that has a bearing to get an identical board. This really cuts down on the amount of sanding I would have to do later on. Now I can start gluing everything up. I started by laying the boards on top of each other and used 2 brad nails to prevent them from sliding around. Once I had about half the stack glued, I clamped them together. I did this in 2 separate sections because I didn't have enough long clamps to do the entire length of the table. As you can see, I probably used more glue than I needed, but I'd rather use too much and not enough. I came back 45 minutes later and scraped off the rest of the glue squeeze out. Once the glue had a chance to dry, I sanded everything down using my belt sander with 80 grit sandpaper. I then switched to my orbital sander and moved my way up to 220 grit sandpaper. I want to note that I had to sand the inside corners using my hand because I couldn't reach those areas with my orbital sander. I want to put a drawer in this table, so I began to cut the sides of the drawer using the scrap pieces I just cut out. I used a tampering jig that allows me to cut a straight edge on odd shaped boards. I made this jig from Jay Bates' YouTube channel. He has a great instructional episode on how to make this jig if you're interested. I also made sure to leave 1 extra board to cut out for the bottom part of the drawer. I'm just making a very basic drawer and use pocket hole screws to hold this together. This drawer won't have a whole lot of use, so I'm not too concerned with how strong it needs to be. Also, before I assembled the drawer, I gave everything a quick sand. For the drawer front, I'm using walnut. The simplest way for me to get the curve of the drawer front was to clamp the walnut board to the table, then trace the outline from the back side of the table. Since I don't have a disc sander, I clamped my belt sander to my workbench and used that to sand down to my line on the drawer front. For this to work, it is important to make sure the belt sander is 90 degrees to your work surface. I use a real simple way to hold the drawer by cutting 2 thin strips of plywood. I then use clamps to determine where I want the drawer to be and then screwed the strips of plywood in place. I intentionally left the back of the drawer taller to prevent the drawer from tipping when being pulled out. For the feet, I used my jigsaw to cut 2 pieces of plywood and sandwich them between 2 pieces of walnut. This gives the feet a unique design and I really liked how it turned out. Once again, I'll leave the details and dimension I used for this project in the description below. Once the glue had a chance to dry, I ran it through my belt sander again to get everything nice and flush. I sanded everything down to 220 grit sandpaper before putting on a finish of boiled linseed oil. For the table, I used oil-based polyacrylic to really bring out the natural look of the birch plywood. And for the drawer, I just painted it white. Now the plywood ingrain soaks the paint a little differently, and I had to put quite a few coats to get everything nice and even. I think I ended up putting on about 4 coats total. Once the drawer had a chance to dry, it was time to add the walnut drawer front. For this process, I slid the drawer in place and then taped playing cards on the top and side to act as spacers. I then used hot glue on the drawer to temporarily hold the drawer front in place. This allowed me to remove the entire drawer to put screws on the inside of the drawer to secure the drawer front. For the legs, I pre-drilled 2 holes on the bottom of each leg, countersunk each hole, and then mounted them to the bottom part of my table. And this table is done. I really liked how this table turned out. It was my first time incorporating the end grain of plywood as the focal part of my project, and I might do something similar to this again in another project. If you liked this video, then please show your support with a thumbs up, and if you want to see more videos like this, then subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.